Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. In this essay, I'd like to talk about executive pay and how that pay is related to the job that these CEOs, and I'll focus mainly on CEOs, the job that these CEOs are doing, and then relate it to what CEOs were being paid relative to shop floor workers, say 50 years ago. And just compare the various situations there, so we can get a feel for is the CEO executive pay justified at all? Some would say no. I'm sure they'd think they were worth every penny of it, but let's have a look at that anyway. Let's take a dive into that subject and see where we go. Now, I'll use an example here that's one of my favourites. It's a retail chain. And in 1970, or in the early 1970s, the CEO was paid $25,000 a year. There were quite a few benefits added on, like a car with a chauffeur, an executive dining room, and there was an plush executive apartment on the beach at a beach resort area where the CEO could take a vacation. There was a very well-stocked alcohol sort of fridge in the executive suite. And so there are other benefits and things like that. Now, I suppose if you packaged it up, all the bits and pieces, maybe it would be worth, say, $50,000, and that's being pretty generous. But we'll put it in that order. So now the company faced quite a lot of competition. There was sort of 9 competitors in the market there, and 2 sort of middleweight competitors. So there was a lot of competition. They had to be pretty good to make a buck, and they did all right. They were one of the sort of top three players out of those sort of 9 plus 2 smaller players. So they were doing reasonably well in the face of a lot of competition. So the shop floor worker at the time was getting about $5,000 a year. So the CEO was paid about 10 times more than the shop floor worker. There wasn't really a whole lot in it when you think about it. They didn't have to do the CEOs didn't have to do the ass busting hard work on the shop floor type thing. But nonetheless, they had a relatively luxurious life, I suppose, relative to shop floor workers, and they had shares in the company weren't that big a deal back in those days, so it was the straight income and benefits that you'd measure it in. The tenure was usually went for a period of time, at least 5 years, and there was a fairly generous retirement scheme that would have looked after them as they went into. Now, so I'm thinking of this one guy. He started. He's one of those classic stories that you used to hear a lot of in those days, where he started off as a kid in the mailroom, and he was bright and he worked hard and he wanted to go places, and I'm sure the right people liked him and all that sort of thing. But even so, and he went through in every different department and section of the company as like an apprenticeship. So he knew his way around the business and what the business did and how it all worked, that sort of thing. And so he began to go places. Then as a sort of around 25 or so years, he then went to a college and got some qualifications that the company, I think, paid most or all of it. So he had that, and they gave out these sort of support for going to college to promising people coming through the ranks. So, and then he ended up being the CEO. So he did okay for himself. Now, today, let's look at that same company today, and this is in Australia. Now, keep in mind that the CEO back then was paid 10 times what the shop floor worker was paid. Now, today, the CEO is paid about 135 times what the shop floor worker is paid. That's now the difference. So it's huge. So but the competition that this company faces, it only has now one competitor and a half-weight, middleweight competitor. So it's almost got no competition. So it can it can set prices pretty much what it wants, and the two market leaders, they stick to the same prices, and there's almost no competition between them. But they've pretty much got an agreement not to compete, and they take it in turns. 1 week this company is doing sort of one, say, a promotion of some sort. Then the following week, the other company does the same promotion. So it's almost, it's a joke. There's no competition in the marketplace, so that the company doesn't have to compete. So the CEO, in fact, comes from a financial background. He's like a merchant banker, and they shoehorn this guy in who's got almost no relevant experience. He's just well liked and well thought of in the big investment firm end of town. The big superannuation funds, the retirement funds, big merchant banks, that sort of thing. So he's shoehorned in there. He's got no expertise. He's never had to compete in the market, not once for his job or anything like that. He's never had to produce the sort of results that you have to in a commercial situation. He hasn't worked his way up or anything like that. He's got a degree from an Ivy League university, but not one that's relevant to the company he's CEO in. He's probably got an above average IQ. I wouldn't think much above though, listening to him talk. But nonetheless, so here's a guy who is he's just the darling of the financial establishment, the same people that are effectively the globalists. And he's being given a prize maybe for his services to globalization or something like that. But clearly he's not qualified to be A, holding position, and B, he's done nothing to earn it. But C, it's not a tough gig. The guy is basically in a fucking oligopoly with cartel price fixing powers. I mean, Mickey Mouse or Yogi Bear or the newborn baby around the corner could do the same job. It's that easy. Money just pours in the door, and they've got no price competition. Now they don't have to. All they've got to do is just not spend too much, and it's the staff that are paying for that. So the wage appreciation of the staff over the year of the shop floor type gig has maybe gone around 11 times since then. But the CEO pays. I mean, we're looking at almost 2,000% since the 70s. So there's been a decoupling. Before, the CEO's pay and performance was related, or bonuses and so on were related to performance. It was in a very competitive marketplace. Now it's in a very uncompetitive marketplace, and the performance bonuses and all these sort of things are just invented in the back room. They're not related to anything, and they've got a very creative way of assessing performance bonuses. So let's say a kid goes into a candy chocolate shop and says, well, if I can eat 100 chocolate covered candies today, then I get a bonus of another 100 tomorrow because I work so hard to eat the candy. It's that stupid. They're just randomly creating these idiotic criteria to trigger bonuses, huge bonuses themselves and their buddies and their cronies. That's completely unrelated to performance. But there's a few feed-in factors to this. Some years ago, and I actually wrote down the date, but I haven't got it in front of me now. Some years ago, the courts in a number of Western countries, suggesting that it was coordinated in some way, decided to say that, or to issue judgments and thus precedents, that the job of management was to represent the shareholders and to look after their interests. It wasn't to look after the community. It wasn't to look after the gay lesbian bathrooms or something. It wasn't to look after the employees. It was to their job is to look after the interests of the shareholders. Now, you may say, well, that's kind of nothing wrong with that, and fair enough. But in the days when you might have 1,000 or 10,000 shareholders, all of them large, and none of them able to sort of cancel the other out. No really big shareholders that can simply decide outcomes, say at the annual general meeting of the company. Now, this all changed when the big investment firms and the big retirement firms, superannuation firms, that sort of thing, they became the merchant banking end of town. They became huge, and their influence on big companies and on investment and on picking winners, the big money end of town decided to make Facebook and Google what they are today. Without their backing, they wouldn't be anywhere. They'd just be some guys with a decent idea. But the big end of town, the big money end, decide we are going to make those guys successful. So they're a manufactured success story. Not that some of the stuff they're doing wasn't good, but you still, if you don't have the big, the money boys on side, you're just not going to get anywhere. Not on the scale that they did, at least. Yeah. So this is something to consider here, that now maybe 3 big investment firms control nearly all the shares, and thus the voting shares and all the influence in this big organisation. So that's why the guy, the merchant bank guy, got given the job. It's part of the gifts and the patronage that now exists at big end of town, because they decide what goes on, who goes where, who has what job, and so he's been gifted that job because he's one of the boys, not because he's got a fucking clue what he's doing. So that thing that the courts decided that you have to look after the shareholders, that changed the relationship of management to performance and so on. So given the big end of town money end of town controls that now, it's changed that relationship. Now the other thing is the decision once the globalists had sort of pretty much taken control. So we're talking, the early 1990s here. The proportion of total, gross national product that was paid to wages has fallen quite considerably. At the same time, the various asset classes that are owned by the big money end of town, such as real estate and ownership of what once were public assets, such as power generation, water supply, that sort of thing, transport grids, they're controlled or owned and controlled by the big end of town. So the prices have increased there quite considerably, and you've noticed, everyone I think will notice, since the globalists and the big financial firms started buying into farming land and food production, so on, the prices there have gone up quite considerably as well, relative to cost of living, or relative to wages rather. So here's a combination of factors that have come together here. But if you look at other than people who may have founded a company, and run it themselves, but if you look at pretty much all the CEOs today, they're all across the Western world. They're being paid way and above what was the case 50 years ago, relative to the shop floor employees, and the relationship between performance and competition and that sort of thing has just disappeared. Most of these firms face almost no competition. They've got cozy government contracts, oligopolies, monopolies, cartels, and so on. They don't face any fucking competition. And so being a CEO of one of these companies is got to be one of the easiest jobs there ever exists. The only thing you'd have to do is to smile, learn to smile all the time as you do the cocktail party circuit, and as you meet government flunkies and so on who are all looking for well-paid jobs for their buddies and their mistresses and the like. I knew a guy quite well or he was the head gun of human resources for a big, kind of a government quang guy, I guess, or had been. It was privatised, but it was controlled by a handful of big investment firms, and we was talking about what he did for the day, and he said, all I do is take phone calls from government goons and hacks and apparatchiks, trying to find very well paid jobs for their useless buddies, and again, the mistresses and the kids and all that sort of stuff. So that's it. And this was some years ago, and they were insisting that nothing less than $500,000 a year in salary for these guys. so this is how it is now at the top end of town. Big salaries, almost no fucking work to do, and incompetent people who are no way qualified to be doing these jobs. And that's part of the crushing of the West. That's part of what is making the West poorer and poorer by the day. So those decisions to represent the shareholders, the decoupling from performance, and the big money in the town treating pretty much the entire commercial business sector as some sort of playground, toys for them to play with, and well-paid sinecures for all their buddies. That's pretty much the situation now, and shows how far it's gone. It's gone downhill since the 70s, when there was a close relationship between performance and pay, or closer than it is now at least, and the difference between the shop floor and the CEO wasn't really that great in terms of pay. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.